You know, horror movies really do get a bad rep. They're often constantly stereotyped with all of the bad cliches and horror movie tropes that we've seen over and over again and have really grown to hate over the years. Why not take a look at the movie that pretty much created all of those? John Carpenter's Halloween, released on October 25th, 1978, literally begins with our killer, 6-year-old Michael Myers, inexplicably grabbing a kitchen knife, going upstairs just after his older sister Judith has had the world's fastest quickie. No, like, they go upstairs, 20 seconds later he comes back down and just leaves. Oh, sure, it's fine when he does it. She doesn't even get angry. She just goes back to brushing her hair like nothing happened. But when I do it, when I have sex with someone and then leave, oh no, I'm a big prick, and then she just can't get over it. She'll mention it years to come for no reason. Middle of an argument, oh yeah, bring it, look, I'm sorry, okay? I've apologized. I'm sorry. Michael then butchers his sister before returning downstairs to his parents, who just conveniently returned home, and realistically just stare at the 6-year-old son covered in blood holding a knife instead of, you know, hey, you little shit, what have you done? Is your sister okay? We then skip 15 years later when Michael's psychiatrist, Dr. Loomis, played by the late great Donald Pleasance, is mortified to discover Myers has escaped from the sanitarium he's been imprisoned in for a decade and a half. Figuring he'll return, Loomis heads back to Michael's hometown of Haddonfield, Illinois, where we get several suspenseful teasers of the killer stalking teenage virgin babysitter cliché Laurie Strode, played by movie debuting Jamie Lee Curtis. You know the drill, he kills off her mates in the process until the virgin survives and Loomis shoots his ass to death before he escapes for a cliffhanger ending. After John Carpenter's previous work, film producer Erwin Yablans and financer Mustafa Akkad contacted him to direct a movie about a psychotic killer that stalks babysitters. Yablans stated, I was thinking what would make sense in the horror genre, and I wanted to make a picture that had the same impact as The Exorcist. Carpenter and his girlfriend at the time, Deborah Hill, wrote a story originally titled The Babysitter Murders, but Yablans suggested setting it on Halloween night, hence the title change. Mustafa Akkad put up $300,000 to the budget, which was actually really low at the time. Akkad was quite fearful about the project too, but claimed, 2 things made me decide to go for it. 1, Carpenter told me the story verbally and in a suspenseful way, almost frame for frame. 2nd, he told me he didn't want to take any fees for it, and that showed that he had confidence in the project. Carpenter only received $10,000 for the picture, which he directed, wrote, and composed the score for, and retained only 10% of the movie's profits. Mustafa Akkad was actually very disinterested in the movie and only went along with it because of the enthusiasm of the director. However, once it became a box office success, he went on to be a part of every single sequel of the franchise before passing away in 2005. The script took approximately 3 weeks to write, and Carpenter based a lot of it around the Celtic traditions of Samhain. This wasn't mentioned until the sequel, but Deborah Hill claimed the idea was that you couldn't kill evil, and that was how we came about the story. We went back to the old idea of Samhain, that Halloween was the night where all the souls are let out to wreak havoc on the living, and then came up with a story about the most evil kid who's ever lived. And when John came up with this fable of a town with a dark secret of someone who once lived there, and now that evil has came back, that's what made Halloween work. Their goal was to treat the movie as a radio play, with a scare only happening every 10 minutes. Hill wrote most of the female dialogue, while Carpenter drafted Donald Pleasance's famous speeches about Myers. Many of the script elements were based on their adolescence and early careers. Haddonfield, Illinois doesn't actually exist, but it was based on Hill's hometown of Haddonfield, New Jersey. Laurie Strode was the name of Carpenter's first girlfriend. Laurie's crush is called Ben Tramer, named after an old college friend of Carpenter's called Bennett Tramer. Michael Myers was the name of, no, not that one, an English producer. The director also pays tribute many times to Alfred Hitchcock throughout the film. One of the kids Laurie babysits is called Tommy Doyle, named after Lieutenant Detective Thomas Doyle from Rear Window. Dr. Loomis was named after Sam Loomis in Psycho, and Sheriff Lee Brackett is the same name of a Hollywood screenwriter. Due to the budget, Carpenter struggled to get many big names involved. Donald Pleasance was paid the most, but it was just $20,000. Curtis was $8,000, and Nick Castle, who played the adult Michael Myers, earned only $25 a day. Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee were both offered the role of Dr. Loomis, but both declined because of the low pay. Christopher Lee later claimed it was the biggest mistake of his entire career. Donald Pleasance was Carpenter's third choice and accepted. American audiences already familiar with him from the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice. He claimed he only took the role because his daughter, who was a musician, loved the score for Carpenter's previous film, Assault on Precinct 13. Others considered for the part included Peter O'Toole, Mel Brooks, Stephen Hill, Walter Matthau, Jerry Van Dyke, Lawrence Tierney, Kirk Douglas, John Belushi, Lloyd Bridges, Abe Vigoda, Chris Christopherson, Sterling Hayden, David Carradine, Dennis Hopper, Charles Napier, Yul Brynner, and Edward Bunker. Originally, the character was even supposed to have a phone call interaction with his wife. Donald Pleasance refused to do it, stating the character should remain mysterious and not have a family or a past. Carpenter confessed that Jamie Lee Curtis was not his first choice for Laurie, stating, "I had no idea who she was. She was 19 and in a TV show at the time, but I didn't watch TV." He originally wanted Anne Lockhart, the daughter of June from Lassie. However, she had commitments to other projects. It wasn't until Deborah Hill and John Carpenter learned that Jamie Lee Curtis was the daughter of Janet Leigh from that brilliant Hitchcock movie. Hill stated, "I knew casting Jamie would be great publicity for the film because her mother was in Psycho." PJ Soles was also picked up after her work in Carrie. She was dating Dennis Quaid at the time, so the writers wanted to get him to play her boyfriend in the movie, but he was preoccupied with other projects and couldn't commit. They also cast Nick Castle as Michael, who was a good friend of Carpenter's at the time. Castle soon, however, converted to directing and ended up making The Last Starfighter, The Boy Who Could Fly, Dennis the Menace, and Major Payne. Michael Myers made Dennis the Menace. Actually, that does make sense when you really think about it. You think that's bad? Will Sandon, who played the 6-year-old Michael Myers, ended up becoming a police officer in Los Angeles. Way to turn your life for killing around, Michael. Good for you. Due to the obscenely low budget, the wardrobe and props were made as cheaply as possible. The famous Michael Myers mask was a Captain Kirk model that cost $1.98. Production designer Tommy Lee Wallace simply widened the eye holes, removed the sideburns and eyebrows, and spray painted it white. John Carpenter claimed the mask had the pale features of a human face, and it truly was spooky looking. He continued to say, "I can only imagine the result if they hadn't painted the mask white. Children will be checking their closet for William Shatner." Other masks that were considered included Richard Nixon, Spock, and even Emmett Kelly. Doesn't really have the same impact. Deborah Hill stated the idea was to make the killer almost humorless, faceless, this sort of pale visage that could resemble a human or not. Many of the actors simply wore their own clothes, and Jamie Lee Curtis purchased her outfit at JCPenney for less than $100. The movie was originally supposed to take place over the course of several days, but the Halloween concept really helped the budget, cutting down on costume and location changes. The film was shot in 20 days in South Pasadena, California, and the cemetery in Sierra Madre. Due to being shot in spring and in the wrong state, fake leaves had to be used, palm trees were attempted to be hidden, sometimes not very well, and they also had trouble finding pumpkins. Furthermore, many of the trick-or-treaters were actual locals and not really actors. Upon release, Halloween did poorly at first. The movie had little advertising and mostly relied on word of mouth, most critics seeming uninterested or dismissive. Pauline Kael of The New Yorker claimed, "Carpenter doesn't seem to have had any life outside the movies. One can trace almost every idea on the screen to directors such as Hitchcock and Brian De Palma and to the Van Luten productions. Maybe when a horror film is stripped of everything but dumb scariness, when it isn't ashamed to revive the stalest device of the genre, the escaped lunatic, it satisfies part of the audience in a more basic, childish way than sophisticated horror pictures do." Tom Allen of The Village Voice was the first positive review, stating, "The film may be sociologically irrelevant, but it seeded that the Hitchcock-like technique was effective and it was the most honest way to make a good schlock film." He also compared it to Psycho and Night of the Living Dead. Andrew Saris from The Voice stated, "It bids fair to become the cult discovery of 1978. Audiences have been heard screaming at its horrifying climaxes." Roger Ebert even selected it as one of his top 10 films of 1978. Many critics who were originally dismissive suddenly praised and were impressed by John Carpenter's choice of camera angles and simple music, and surprised by the lack of blood, gore, and graphic violence. Rotten Tomatoes rates it 94% and calls it scary, suspenseful, and viscerally thrilling. Halloween really set the standards for modern horror films. Although many compared it to Alfred Hitchcock's work, TV Guide called comparisons to Psycho silly and groundless. Many critics blamed the movie specifically for spawning the slasher subgenre, which they felt had descended into sadism and misogyny. Decades after its release, Mick Martin and Marsha Porter ripped apart the film's first-person camera shots that previous critics had praised and many other directors utilized, such as Friday the 13th. Their problem was that it encouraged audiences to identify more with the killer, with the way the camera would move in on the screaming or the weapon or the pain. Amazingly, many feminist critics have ridiculed the movie for its sexism and for catering towards the male demographic. I've seen Halloween hundreds of times, and not once did I think, "Death to women!" Aviva Briefel actually claims when Michael's face is temporarily revealed, it was supposed to give pleasure to the male viewers. She claims these moments are so masochistic in nature and give pleasure to men because they are willingly submitting themselves to the women in the film. They submit themselves temporarily because it will make their return to authority even more powerful. You hear that, guys? Michael Myers' face gives you pleasure. I mean, talk about clutching at straws. There's even feminist theories that Carpenter and Hill deliberately killed off anyone who had the nookie to show that promiscuous sex is wrong and the virgin survives but only by pure luck because she's a female. Did they even watch the same movie I did? Carpenter's actually responded to this and claimed that it was never intentional. He stated the teenagers who had sex died only because they were too preoccupied trying to get laid to notice a killer on the loose. Laurie survived because she was alone that night and therefore that more alert. He also explained that she's a virgin and therefore more sexually frustrated. She stabs Michael frequently to take out all of her stress and frustration, and it's supposed to be phallic imagery. I never once noticed that, so thanks John for ruining Halloween for me. Oh well, I'm sure I did that already with my own show anyway. Over the years, fans would actually tell John Carpenter that they were horrified at the disfigured face of Michael Myers when his mask is temporarily removed. However, it was just the actor's normal face. Carpenter stated this is evidence of the power of suggestion. The audience saw a monster on the screen and naturally assumed he was a monster underneath the mask, seeing a disfigured face that wasn't there. I've never once thought that when I saw it, but to each their own. It's kind of mean though, thinking the actor's normal face is horrifying. The movie went on to be nominated for the Saturn Award for Best Horror Film but lost to The Wicker Man. In 2001, it was ranked 68th by the AFI in the 100 Years, 100 Thrills. It was ranked 14th on Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments for that scene. The Chicago Film Critics Association named it the third scariest film ever made. In 2007, AOL 31 Days of Horror listed it as the greatest horror movie of all time. In 2008, Empire selected it as one of the greatest 500 movies ever. And in 2010, Total Film selected it for their own list of the same theme. The movie had a budget of just $300,000 and went on to gross $47 million in the United States, making it, at the time, the most successful independent movie ever made. Although admittedly the film hasn't aged particularly well, I do still consider it one of the greatest of all time. It popularized the slasher film genre and is responsible for so many other classics. It didn't rely on cheap scares or gore, just a genuinely eerie and chilling story. You can call it cliche, but this film kind of invented the tropes before they were tropes. If not for this film, we wouldn't get Friday the 13th or A Nightmare on Elm Street. Or When a Stranger Calls, but that was an unfortunate mistake, like the blockbuster Buster's Birth. It has been compared to other slasher films before it, such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas, but there's actually a reason for the latter. Halloween was originally intended to be a sequel. Carpenter loved Black Christmas so much he wanted to make a second film for it and even gained permission from the director himself. However, as writing continued, it became a completely separate movie altogether. After release, a book based on the film was written by Curtis Richards in 1979. It's quite rare to find, but it can't even follow continuity correctly, constantly referring to Michael talking whilst in the institution despite the movie clearly stating he never talked. Listening is fun. In 1983, the movie was turned into a video game for the Atari 2600 and, well, I'll just let the nerd take this one.
I spent 8 years trying to figure it out, and another 7 trying to keep it locked in my closet because I realized what was living behind that game was simply evil.
Yeah, it wasn't very successful. The film, like all movies, has problems, no doubt. Obviously, nowadays, the horror genre tends to add overly done special effects or gore, so to today's standards, this film, you'd probably grow bored with the suspense and storytelling. However, the final act when Myers chases Laurie is absolutely terrifying. Before release, Carpenter showed this sequence to a critic, and she laughed at how unscary it was. It originally had no music whatsoever. Because of this reaction, John quickly threw together the amazing score, and the same critic suddenly found it horrifying. The musical score is incredible, and Carpenter composed it in just 4 days. It's one of my favourite scores of all time and really adds to the tension of the picture. The first-person POV shots really help you get involved in the action, even if Myers was surgically transplanted with a grown woman's arm at such a young age. Poor guy. There's long shots like this that really help build the suspense well. If I were to find faults, it would mostly be the acting performances. Annie, played by Nancy Kyes, is dreadful, and I mean dreadful, which serves a problem as she's in the majority of the movie.
I hate a guy with a car and no sense of humor.
My dad!
What would you say if I told you that you were going to the homecoming dance tomorrow night?
What would you do if I told you I'm being nominated for a Razzie tomorrow night? I think because of the film's cult status, everyone just doesn't want to remember that the movie does have quite poor acting. I mean, I love Donald Pleasance. He shapes the entire Halloween franchise together, but here in the first film, as awesome as his dialogue is...
He's gone. He's gone from here. The evil is gone.
Well, okay, some of it's really bad, but for the most part, it's pretty good. However, it's just delivered so wooden.
I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong.
Just thank God he got better with the sequels. Jamie Lee Curtis was actually positive that she was going to lose her job. After her first day of shooting, she hated her own performance and thought that she was terrible. John Carpenter phoned her up and she was sure that she was about to be fired. Instead, he congratulated her on doing such a good job. It's ironic because Curtis herself has admitted, "I loathe horror movies. I don't like to be surprised." She's great throughout the film. Until... You were doing so well, Jamie, up to that point. So well. The movie was also shot out of sequence, and Carpenter created a fear meter in order to help Curtis understand how hysterical she'd need to be. Some days she'd be at a 4, but that night could be a 9, a clever way to keep his actors in character. The kids give bad performances also, but they're not in the film too much to phase it a great deal. I've heard some state that the movie should have introduced Michael Myers even slower than they did. Like, not even show him until the climax. Show him in stages behind his back, which they do, but not do the big reveal until the final act. The movie shows him at the 15-minute mark. I can understand this argument, and I can see where it's coming from, but I feel like the movie does a brilliant job playing on the paranoia angle. Laurie feels like she's being followed, but it's Halloween, people are in costumes, and us, the viewer, knowing otherwise, it just adds to the suspense. I feel like they did a good job building it, and one thing I'll always credit the movie majorly for is the pacing. Carpenter's whole intent for the Michael Myers character was to make him so nobody could ever relate to him. In the script and the credits, he's always referred to as the Shape. This is a reference to the Salem witch trials, which used the term to describe specters of the accused doing mischief or harming another person. Carpenter based the Myers character on an experience he had in college when he had a tour of a psychiatric hospital. He met a child who just stared at him with a look of evil, and it really terrified him. Little did he know that that kid would end up growing up to be Film Brain. He also took inspiration for Myers from 1973's Westworld, in which there's a robotic assassin character. A robotic assassin Michael Myers. Make that happen, Hollywood, please. So, what else can I nitpick? Well, how come not once do any kids come trick-or-treating at any of the houses Michael is visiting? Like, it's Halloween. No one comes by, not once. The credits claim Michael is 23 years old. He killed Judith when he was 6. 15 years passed. 15 plus 6 is 21. But you know, let's just check the sequel just to make sure.
Michael Myers is 21.
Yep, I was right. Why would anyone stop having sex to answer the phone? Seriously, I don't give a shit if there's a thunderstorm or an earthquake all happening and everyone on the street is being drowned while raccoons are attacking. The apocalypse is starting. I need to ejaculate first. The tombstone of Michael's sister claims that she was 16 years old when she died, yet everyone says that she was 17. Does John Carpenter just struggle with maths or something?
And that's why he's in retard math.
Here, Tommy accidentally says Laurie's line before she does and stops himself midway. Just listen.
Now there's nobody out there.
Really, Carpenter? You couldn't have done another take? There's no way Michael could transport this goddamn gravestone across town without anybody noticing. For the longest time, people criticized the film for Michael somehow knowing how to drive despite being locked up for 15 years. To be fair, the movie itself acknowledges it.
Sam Haddonfield is 150 miles away from here now. Now, for God's sakes, he can't drive a car. He was doing very well last night. Maybe someone around here gave him lessons.
But Carpenter has actually debunked this, simply explaining that for 15 years, Michael would have been sat in the back seat watching Loomis drive him around. Serial killers are known to be highly intelligent. It's pretty feasible that he could have simply watched and monitored Loomis operating the car. No one questions how his niece knows how to drive in part 6, and there's no explanation there. Also, I find it ridiculously difficult to believe that his doctor of 15 years doesn't know Laurie Strode is his sister. We don't find this out until the sequel, but he's been his shrink since the first murder, and no one kept him informed. The movie kills a dog. Why? Why do that? Just stick to the humans. Humans suck. Don't kill a dog. This knife would not be able to reach all the way through his body, let alone sustain his entire weight. But who gives a shit? That shot looks awesome. However, it features this stupid line.
Well, kiddo, I thought you outgrew superstition.
What does that even mean? Even John Carpenter himself has admitted on the audio commentary of the film that Deborah Hill wrote this line, and even he doesn't know what it means. Sort your shit out, Deborah. Regardless of its issues, the film plays with your mind and utilizes the subtle storytelling and tension-building style impeccably well. Carpenter utilizes the background of shots as the main focus, which really separates him from other filmmakers, and it really works and draws you in further, building the suspense so well. Set your mindset to the time it came out and you will enjoy it a lot more. In my mind, one of the greatest horror thrillers of all time, and better than most who imitated its style. And if you really want to know what I think of the sequels, let's do some rapid fire. Meh, anal splooge, awesome, underrated, guilty pleasure, brilliant, the equivalent of seeing my ex-wife naked whilst being gangbanged by every member of the Rolling Stones as a Rihanna album plays. In 2007, Rob Zombie remade the film, which I think is pointless anyway, remaking a movie with a shitload of sequels that didn't even need to be fixed in the first place. And it was okay. It enraged most Halloween fans because he gave Myers an entire backstory to why he is evil. It's done incredibly over the top and just silly. He gets gets bullied, he has an abusive stepdad, a slutty sister, his mother's a stripper. Subtle. Why not God strike him down as well? You know, every time he goes outside, he gets struck by lightning. It pours rain every time he goes outside. Dogs run up to him and just piss on his leg randomly. Why not? But if you think they're not subtle, he spares his sister, who is called Angel. The evil killer spares the girl called Angel. Does subtlety just not exist in movies anymore? It was okay. My issue lies on the fact that some people just snap. They don't need a reason. Many serial killers just flipped for no reason, and that's why I found Michael Myers so interesting in the first place. We knew nothing about him. There were subtle hints in part 8 about his childhood, but that's the thing. They were subtle. Here, they were thrown in your face, and it just made me lose interest in the character because it was like they were trying to get us to sympathize with him. John Carpenter wanted nobody to be able to relate to Michael Myers. Rob Zombie gave him every cliche, poor childhood trope in the book to make him relatable, which ruined the entire thing for me. The director also made it a gore fest in both of his films, which further disappoints me. Remember when horrors were scary, built on tension and suspense, not over-the-top blood and guts flying everywhere? It's just not needed, and it's just lazy. It's exactly why the original was so good and didn't need to be redone. Malcolm McDowell played Loomis, and he was okay, but then the second one arrived, which is worse than catching Ebola from an AIDS-ridden cancer patient. Michael Myers wore no mask, had a beard, wore a hoodie, and in an alternate ending, actually talked. Rob Zombie himself didn't even want to make the sequel, and it shows. It was just a weird, unstructured mess, and it's no surprise that the series of remakes ended there. Amazingly, however, on June the 21st, 2011, it was announced that a new film would follow, entitled Halloween 3D, to be released on October 26, 2012. No director or writer was named, but Patrick Lussier and Todd Farmer were rumored before dropping out to work on the Hellraiser remake. No confirmation of a script or a cast or crew was ever announced, and the movie vanished into thin air as nothing ever began to even develop. In February 2015, Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan announced to be writing a new film with Malek Akkad and Matt Stein producing. On June the 25th, 2015, the Weinstein Company were announced to be moving ahead with a sequel entitled Halloween Returns. It would be a standalone film to reintroduce audiences to Michael Myers after his initial rampage. A standalone film called Halloween Returns. The story was to set a group of Haddonfield youngsters against Myers. The main protagonist was to be an 18-year-old child of one of his previous victims, as well as a cop obsessed with Myers' case, 'cause that's never been done before. Myers was to be on death row, and the two heroes sneak in to watch his execution, but while the sharp Myers escapes and the rampage begins. On October the 22nd, 2015, Malek Akkad wanted to postpone production and insisted that the delay would create a much better movie, making changes to the story itself. In December 2015, Dimension Films announced that they somehow no longer held the rights to the franchise, and Halloween Returns was ultimately cancelled. On May the 23rd, 2016, Miramax and Blumhouse Productions announced that they would be co-developing a new Halloween film, and John Carpenter himself would even be returning to produce and act as the creative consultant. Carpenter claimed, 38 years after the original Halloween, I'm going to try to help make the 10th sequel the scariest of them all. We'll see, John. We'll see.
Cute, Bob, real cute.